After a catastrophe, access to critical commodities like food and water may be severely limited. If commercial retailers are unable to reopen or can't get goods into the impacted area, it is up to the local emergency management agency to make sure everyone has access to food and water. A Commodity Point of Distribution, or CPOD, is a temporary location where bottled water, packaged meals, and other critical items are distributed to the public until stores are able to reopen. My name is Karen. I'm a Logistics Section Chief in the Local Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. This is Logistics 202, the Commodity Point of Distribution. This course will explain the different types of CPODs, how they fit into a mass feeding plan, how a local EOC determines when and where CPODs are needed, and how to source the staff, resources, and commodities required for effective CPOD operations. Every local emergency management agency should have a plan to feed people after a disaster. The CPOD plan supplements this mass feeding plan by providing directions on how to distribute life-sustaining commodities like food and water to members of the public. A CPOD may also be used to distribute non-consumable items like tarps and cleanup kits when necessary. It's up to the local emergency management agency, or EOC, and their partner agencies or organizations to decide whether CPODs are needed after a disaster strikes. To determine whether the CPOD plan should be activated, decision makers consider possible triggers. If an incident disrupts public access to life-sustaining commodities for more than 2 days, and neither the private sector nor the local or state mass feeding plan can meet the needs of the population, EOC decision makers may choose to activate their CPOD plan. Also, your local elected official may direct the local emergency management agency, or EOC, to activate the CPOD plan if there is another compelling reason to do so. After the CPOD plan is activated, public access to life-sustaining commodities is continually monitored. Once access has been restored and CPODs are no longer needed, the Emergency Management Agency, or EOC, will decide when to deactivate the plan and will notify the public before CPODs are closed and demobilized. The largest CPODs are designed to serve as many as 20,000 members of the public per day and push out thousands of pounds of commodities. To accommodate all these visitors and minimize wait times, each CPOD must be set up to make the distribution process as efficient as possible. CPODs can be set up for either vehicle or pedestrian distribution with 5 possible layouts. You may choose from 3 different vehicle layouts and 2 different pedestrian layouts. Let's take a look at a sample vehicle layout first. This example shows a Type 3 vehicle CPOD. The Type 3 is smaller than a Type 1 or Type 2 CPOD and serves the smallest number of visitors. Vehicle CPODs are often set up in empty parking lots or other paved open spaces. Before operations can begin, the EOC must send specific resources, including office supplies, personnel safety equipment, hand trucks, radios, and tents or other temporary structures to the CPOD. You can find resource requirement guidance as well as information on ongoing resource, supply, and service needs in Operational Strategy 3 of the Disaster Logistics CPOD Plan. At vehicle-based CPODs, staff members use traffic cones to create lanes through the CPOD loading area. When community members pull up to a loading point, commodities can be loaded directly into their trunk without anyone exiting the vehicle. Now let's take a look at a pedestrian layout. There are 2 types of pedestrian CPODs. This is an example of a Type 2 pedestrian CPOD, which serves the smallest number of visitors. In the pedestrian layout, visitors arrive on foot and form a single line to enter the CPOD. Once inside, visitors are directed into lanes and receive their commodities from a loading point before exiting. For safety reasons, the pedestrian layout is never combined with the vehicle layout. It's up to the local emergency management agency, or EOC, to decide how many CPODs are needed and where they should be located. The Disaster Logistics CPOD Plan explains how to make these decisions. Let's discuss some of the key steps in the decision-making process now. For starters, you'll need to estimate the demand for CPODs. You can't figure out how many C-pods you need unless you know how many people need life-sustaining commodities. So you start by looking at how many people live in the impacted area and reviewing damage assessments, hazardous information, and aerial assessments. You can also use census and other data to determine the total population that may be in need of commodities. Sustained power outages often create a need for life-sustaining commodities, so be sure to identify how many people are without power and how long they have been without power. And remember to only activate C-pods when private sector operations are disrupted, or the local mass feeding plan is overwhelmed. For example, a C-pod should never be opened near an operational supermarket. Once you've estimated how many people are in need, you'll need to determine your operating pattern, which is a combination of crew working hours and hours of C-pod operation. There are 3 possible operating patterns for a C-pod, and each option has different advantages and disadvantages based on the number of people that need to be served and security conditions in an impacted area. Operating Pattern 2 is the most commonly recommended option since it allows for 12 hours of distribution to the public, followed by 12 hours of overnight restocking. The next step is to decide whether your C-pods will be vehicle or pedestrian-based. Think about how members of the public are most likely to reach the C-pod. If you're in an urban area where many people don't have personal vehicles, for example, you may decide to open more pedestrian-based C-pods. Now you can figure out how many C-pods are needed using the 3 pieces of information you have already established: the number of people in need, your operating pattern, and the distribution model, vehicle or pedestrian. The Disaster Logistics C-pod Plan provides tables in Operational Strategy 1 to help you with this calculation. Finally, you can create a list of potential C-pod sites and begin to select your preferred sites or facilities based on geographic need, incident conditions, and the generally preferred characteristics of a C-pod, such as a power source and vehicle accessibility. Once you know which sites you want to use, contact the site owners or managers to make sure each site is available and get permission to use it. You'll need to make sure you have written agreements in place governing the use of the site. And you should document site conditions, including any damage, before beginning C-pod operations. Now let's take a look at the staff members you need to run a C-pod. Once the local emergency management agency decides to activate the C-pod plan, the EOC manager assigns a C-pod coordinator to lead C-pod operations from the EOC. The C-pod coordinator is responsible for getting C-pod operations up and running, making sure sites are identified and staff and resources are deployed as needed. C-pod staff may be provided by a number of agencies and organizations, and will include skilled and experienced personnel, as well as unskilled staff and volunteers. Each C-pod has a manager who oversees daily operations and reports to the C-pod coordinator in the EOC. The C-pod manager is the main point of contact for communication between each C-pod and the EOC. The C-pod manager may also have a deputy to assist with these duties. A security or law enforcement supervisor should be on site to oversee security and deter criminal activity. Additional law enforcement officers may be needed to supplement this effort. Each C-pod will also have a safety officer. It is the safety officer's duty to develop and recommend measures for ensuring the safety of both C-pod personnel and members of the public by identifying and anticipating any safety issues and providing mitigation plans. The remaining staff is split into 3 crews, each of which performs critical tasks for the C-pod and has a crew leader to oversee those tasks. The loading ration crew physically distributes commodities to members of the public. The flow crew manages lines, and the flow crew leader serves as the public face of the C-pod. The offloading supply crew receives supplies and moves them to temporary storage areas and commodity loading points. The number of staff and crew members needed to run a C-pod depends on the type of C-pod selected and the operating pattern. For example, a larger staff will be needed to operate a Type 1 vehicle-based C-pod using Operating Pattern 1, then to run a Type 3 vehicle-based CPOD using Operating Pattern 3. You can find tables in Operational Strategy 2 of the Disaster Logistics CPOD plan that provide suggested staffing numbers for each CPOD depending upon type and operating pattern. The EOC can use these tables to estimate the number of personnel that will be needed to staff each CPOD. For CPOD operations to succeed, there must be ongoing coordination and planning between the EOC and the CPOD managers at each site. Coordination is especially important when dealing with shipments of commodities to the CPODs. The CPOD coordinator must work closely with EOC personnel to determine the timeline for deliveries and make sure suppliers have complete and accurate instructions on how, when, and where to deliver shipments. The CPOD coordinator must also communicate all relevant shipment information to the CPOD managers, including any special instructions on how to receive and manage incoming shipments. The CPOD coordinator defines CPOD objectives and sets distribution guidelines for each operational period. This operational planning relies on accurate and timely reports from each CPOD manager. The CPOD coordinator also needs these individual reports in order to calculate burn rates and anticipate upcoming requirements. CPOD operations can be complex, so it's absolutely crucial for every person to know what they are responsible for and who they report to so that they can be sure to get the right information to the right person at the right time. To learn more about the role of the EOC in supporting CPODs, the Disaster Logistics CPOD Plan is a great place to start. The Disaster Logistics CPOD Field Operations Guide, or FOG, is a great resource for CPOD staff working in the field at a CPOD site. National resource plans like the Incident Command System, National Incident Management System, and the National Response Framework may also be helpful. For more information on how to access these resources and many more, visit the Regional Logistics Program website, www.emergencylogistics.org.